Good evening, and welcome back to Bedtime and Historian. Have you ever held a deck of cards in your hand and wondered why such a small stack of paper could carry kings and queens, seasons and weeks, risk and ritual, why there are 52 of them, no more and no less, and how this quiet order became so universal that it rarely invites a second thought. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from and what your local time is right now. There is something quietly comforting in imagining this story unfolding across many different evenings at once. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Long before poker tables, casinos, or riverboats existed, there were other rooms, other tables, other hands shuffling paper in softer light. The story of poker cards begins not with gamblers, but with merchants, scribes, craftsmen, and rulers. People living in centuries when paper itself was still a marvel in many parts of the world. In the late medieval world, trade routes stitched together distant civilizations. Caravans moved across Central Asia. Ships crossed the Mediterranean. Paper, once a closely guarded Chinese innovation, had spread westward through Islamic lands into Europe. With paper came new possibilities. It was cheaper than parchment, easier to produce, and adaptable. People used it for contracts, letters, devotional texts, and increasingly for leisure. In the cities of Mamluk Egypt during the 13th and 14th centuries, evidence suggests that sets of playing cards were already circulating. These early decks were carefully painted by hand. They bore suits that reflected courtly and military life, cups, swords, coins, and polo sticks. Polo, in particular, was a sport of the elite, not a pastime of common farmers. These cards were not crude diversions. They were refined objects, meant for those with time and status. Ordinary life in these societies was structured by religion, hierarchy, and survival. Most people worked long hours in agriculture, trade, or craft production. Markets were crowded, noisy spaces. Food was simple: bread, lentils, vegetables, occasional meat for those who could afford it. Clothing reflected social rank: loose robes, turbans, layered garments for warmth or modesty. Life was not leisurely for most, yet even in constrained societies, people sought moments of play. Games offered something subtle but powerful: temporary suspension. A board, a set of carved pieces, a handful of marked papers. These allowed for competition, strategy, and chance within defined rules. They did not overturn social hierarchies, but they allowed participants to step briefly outside daily obligations. In that space, the structure of the world could be imitated, challenged, or rearranged. When playing cards travelled into Europe in the late 14th century, they entered a continent in tension. Feudal structures still shaped society. Kings and dukes held power, but cities were rising in influence. Guilds organized craftsmen. Merchant families accumulated wealth. The church guided moral teaching and daily rhythm. Bells marked time. Saints' days interrupted labor. Famine and plague were recent memories. The Black Death had reduced populations drastically in the mid-14th century. Survivors inherited new opportunities and new uncertainties. Labor was more valuable. Social mobility, while still limited, was less rigid than before. In this atmosphere, leisure activities spread more widely. The first European references to playing cards appear in municipal records that attempted to restrict them. Authorities worried about disorder. Gambling, in particular, troubled city councils and religious leaders. Wagers could lead to debt, arguments, and violence. Cards were portable. They required no permanent board. They could be played in taverns, private homes, or even on the road. The tavern itself was a defining feature of urban life. Wooden tables, ale poured from barrels, stew simmering in iron pots. Travellers exchanged news. Artisans discussed trade. Dice were common. Cards soon joined them. These early European decks often mirrored the suits found in Islamic cards. Cups, swords, coins, and batons. The imagery reflected familiar objects of daily life and chivalric culture. Hand-painted decks were expensive. Wealthy families commissioned ornate sets. In some courts, artists illuminated cards with gold leaf and intricate patterns. These were objects of prestige. They were handled carefully, stored in boxes, and brought out for controlled amusement. Meanwhile, cheaper woodblock printed decks began to appear for broader audiences. The invention and spread of woodblock printing changed the economics of cards dramatically. Craftsmen carved designs into wooden blocks, inked them, and pressed them onto sheets of paper. This allowed repeated production of consistent images. The suits and figures became standardized within regions. Production costs fell. Cards became accessible to merchants, minor officials, and eventually common townspeople. Political authorities continued to react. In some cities, bans were issued during certain holy days. In others, taxes were imposed on card production. Governments recognized that even small objects could generate revenue. By licensing printers, rulers gained both control and income. A deck of cards was not merely a game, it was a taxable commodity. Religious concerns persisted. Sermons warned against excessive gambling. The moral argument was rarely about the cards themselves, but about what they encouraged: idleness, greed, distraction from prayer. Yet prohibition was inconsistent. Enforcement varied. The reality of daily life meant that games continued. As cards spread northward into German-speaking lands and France, new suits emerged. In German regions, suits such as hearts, bells, acorns, and leaves appeared. These symbols reflected local landscapes and hunting culture. In France, designers simplified imagery further into hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades. These shapes were easier to reproduce with stencils and woodcuts. Simplicity lowered costs and improved clarity. This French pattern would eventually dominate. But at this early stage, Europe contained multiple parallel traditions. A traveller might recognize the concept of a deck, yet find unfamiliar symbols in another region. Still, certain features began to stabilize. Numbered cards, a small group of higher-ranking court figures, and a finite total number within a deck. The idea of hierarchy was embedded naturally in these designs. Medieval society was stratified. Kings ruled by divine right. Nobles served as military and administrative elites. Peasants labored. The presence of kings and other court figures within decks mirrored this social structure. When a player held a king in hand, the symbolism was immediate and understandable. Daily life in late medieval Europe revolved around rhythm. Agricultural seasons determined labor. Winter was quieter in rural areas, offering more time for indoor activities. Candlelight extended evenings in wealthier homes. In cities, guild halls hosted gatherings. Games fit easily into these intervals. Economic pressures also shaped play. Coinage was limited for many. Small wagers might involve food, drink, or tokens, rather than substantial sums. For merchants and minor nobles, higher stakes were possible. Cards allowed scalable risk. One could play casually or seriously depending on circumstance. As the 15th century progressed, the spread of the printing press accelerated standardization. Movable type revolutionized book production, but woodcut techniques continued to serve image-based products like cards. Workshops developed recognizable styles. Regional identities persisted, yet trade networks carried popular patterns beyond their origins. The number of cards within decks varied at times. Some early packs did not contain what we now consider the standard 52, yet gradually, patterns converged. 4 suits with a sequence of numbered cards and a set of court figures proved balanced. The total count settled near what would become familiar. Why did 4 suits endure? Practicality played a role. Too many suits would complicate recognition and gameplay. Too few would limit variety. 4 created manageable complexity. It aligned comfortably with existing symbolic frameworks: 4 seasons, 4 cardinal directions, 4 humours in medieval medical theory. Whether these connections were deliberate or incidental remains debated, but the number felt culturally stable. The question of 52, however, would emerge later as decks solidified. At this early stage, standardization was still developing. Craftsmen adjusted counts based on local preference. Some decks included additional figures, others omitted certain ranks. The social world around these objects continued to evolve. Renaissance humanism reshaped intellectual life. Exploration opened new trade routes. Urban populations expanded. With increased movement of goods and people, cultural artifacts traveled more quickly. It is worth imagining the quiet normality of a 15th century evening. A small room above a workshop, the smell of ink and wood shavings, a family sharing bread and cheese. After supper, a simple deck is placed on the table. Hands shuffle clumsily. Laughter is restrained, mindful of neighbours. Outside, the street is dark except for a few lanterns. In that modest setting, the foundations of what would later become poker are quietly present. At this point in history, no one spoke of poker. The games were varied: trick-taking, matching, wagering games influenced by local custom. Yet the structural elements were forming. Hierarchy of ranks, division into suits, finite total count, portable format. Meanwhile, political life remained turbulent. Wars between kingdoms disrupted trade, alliances shifted, taxation increased to fund armies. In such climates, inexpensive amusements retained appeal. Cards required minimal equipment and space. They adapted easily to changing circumstances. Cultural values also influenced design. Modesty codes in Islamic regions had prohibited the depiction of human figures on some cards, leading to abstract calligraphy instead of faces. In Europe, human imagery was common, and kings and queens appeared openly. This divergence reflected deeper religious aesthetics. As the centuries moved forward, the groundwork for the modern deck solidified further. By the 16th century, the French suit system was spreading widely due to its production efficiency. 4 suits, 13 ranks per suit, multiplication yields 52. The number 13 itself held mixed symbolism in European culture. It could be associated with the Last Supper or with misfortune. Yet in card structure, 13 provided a useful sequence: ace through 10, plus 3 court cards. Balanced, symmetrical, complete. Gradually, 52 became common not because of mystical design, but because it worked. It supported a wide range of games. It allowed mathematical variation without overwhelming players. It was large enough to generate unpredictability, small enough to manage physically. If you had lived in that era, you might not have noticed this convergence. You would simply have purchased or borrowed the deck available in your town. Its structure would seem natural. Only centuries later would observers ask why this number endured. In these early developments, we see not a single inventor, but a process shaped by trade, technology, belief, and habit. The history of poker cards does not begin with a dramatic creation moment. It begins with gradual adaptation. And so, as the late medieval world shifted into the early modern age, the deck of cards moved quietly alongside it, growing more standardized, more widespread, and increasingly woven into daily life. The foundation was laid. The number 52 was taking root, not as a grand statement, but as a practical solution in a changing world. The story will move forward from here into symbolism, resistance, and eventually into the emergence of poker itself. But at this beginning, it is enough to see how ordinary hands, in ordinary rooms, shaped an object that would travel across centuries. By the opening years of the 15th century, the deck of cards had already crossed borders that armies and diplomats struggled to pass. It moved more quietly than merchants' caravans and more persistently than decrees issued from palace balconies. Folded into satchels, tucked into sleeves, stored in wooden chests aboard ships, it followed the ordinary currents of trade. The routes that carried silk, spices and manuscripts also carried habits. In the eastern Mediterranean, commercial ports were dense with languages. Venetian traders negotiated in Arabic. Genoese captains calculated cargo against uncertain winds. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities lived in close proximity, each maintaining distinct religious rhythms yet sharing markets and streets. In such places, ideas rarely remained confined. Paper itself had traveled this way centuries earlier, moving westward from China through the Islamic world into Europe. The technology of making it cheaper and more abundant reshaped record-keeping, literature, and education. Playing cards followed a similar path, though with less ceremony. No council formally introduced them. No chronicle celebrated their arrival. They simply appeared in inventories, in complaints, in small municipal fines. In Islamic lands, early card decks displayed a refined aesthetic. Surviving examples from Mamluk Egypt reveal careful geometric design and calligraphy. Because many Islamic traditions discouraged figurative imagery in certain contexts, these decks avoided painted human faces. Instead, they used ornate script to designate ranks. The suits, cups, swords, coins, and polo sticks reflected courtly and martial life. The polo stick, in particular, spoke of elite recreation. The game of polo was not played by peasants in fields. It belonged to nobility. When European artisans encountered such cards, they adapted them rather than copying them exactly. In Spain and Italy, suits remained close to the original four: cups, swords, coins, and batons. The baton replaced the polo stick, aligning more closely with European familiarity. These suits mirrored aspects of daily and aristocratic life: chalices used in feasts or religious ritual, swords carried by knights, coins handled by merchants, and batons associated with authority or rural labor. The political climate of Europe at this time was fragmented. City-states in Italy competed economically and militarily. France and England were locked in extended conflict during the 100 Years' War. The Holy Roman Empire was less centralized than its name suggested, composed of semi-autonomous territories. In this environment, cultural exchange occurred not through unity but through constant contact. Urban centers were growing: Florence, Venice, Paris, Nuremberg. These cities pulsed with craft production. Guilds regulated training and quality. Apprentices lived with masters, learning skills over years. Workshops produced textiles, metal goods, and printed images. Cards fit easily into this economy. They required artistic design, carving skill for wood blocks, access to paper, and distribution networks. The early European card maker was not a mysterious figure but a craftsman embedded in urban life. He purchased paper from local mills, often located along rivers for water power. He carved suit symbols into wood blocks. He applied ink carefully. He might employ family members to color the printed sheets by hand. The process was labor-intensive but repeatable. Because cards were relatively inexpensive compared to illuminated manuscripts or fine tapestries, they reached beyond elite circles. Students in universities, minor officials, soldiers on leave, merchants awaiting cargo, many encountered them. This broader access raised concern among authorities. Records from the late 14th and early 15th centuries show periodic bans on card playing in cities such as Bern, Florence, and Paris. These prohibitions rarely lasted. They were usually tied to particular concerns: excessive gambling during religious festivals, disturbances in taverns, or distraction from work. The anxiety was less about the object and more about behavior. Religious teaching at the time emphasized discipline and moral order. Idle time was often viewed with suspicion. Labor was virtuous. Excessive wagering suggested greed or lack of restraint. Yet, religious institutions themselves were not uniformly opposed to games. Monastic communities sometimes permitted controlled recreation. The boundary lay in moderation. In taverns, cards joined dice as tools of entertainment. A tavern was a practical space. Benches along walls, a hearth for warmth, rough wooden tables. Ale or wine was served in simple cups. Conversations ranged from crop yields to political rumours. Cards introduced structured play into this setting. Unlike dice, which depended almost entirely on chance, many card games involved memory, strategy, and partnership. Meanwhile, aristocratic courts maintained their own gaming traditions. Noble families enjoyed elaborate entertainments. Music, poetry, chess, and cards all found a place. In such settings, decks were often richly decorated. Kings and queens appeared in recognizable clothing styles, reflecting contemporary fashion. Garments featured layered fabrics, fur-lined cloaks, and distinctive hats. These images reinforced social hierarchy. As the Renaissance unfolded, artistic realism improved. Human figures on cards gained clearer expressions and more detailed clothing. While still stylized for practicality, they mirrored the growing interest in portraiture. A king card might resemble the armor and regalia of contemporary rulers. The queen might reflect prevailing ideals of femininity and nobility. Trade networks carried the French suit system farther north and west. French printers had discovered that simple, symmetrical shapes, hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades, were easier to stencil and color in large quantities. Instead of individually painting complex batons or cups, workers could apply flat areas of red or black quickly. This efficiency reduced cost and increased consistency. Economic pressure favored this simplicity. Printers operated within competitive markets. Lower prices attracted buyers. As French decks spread through trade into England and beyond, their design gradually displaced other regional suits. By the 17th century, the French pattern had become dominant in many parts of Europe. This dominance did not erase local variation immediately. German suited decks persisted in Central Europe. Spanish suited decks continued in Iberia and parts of Italy. Yet for games that required standardized counting and ranking across regions, the French system offered convenience. The structure of 13 ranks per suit became increasingly common. Ace through 10 provided numbered sequence. 3 court cards, king, queen, and jack, completed each suit. The jack replaced earlier terms such as knave in English usage, partly to avoid confusion with the king when abbreviated. Language adapted alongside imagery. The total count of 52 emerged as a practical outcome of this structure. 4 suits multiplied by 13 ranks. The appeal of this arrangement lay in balance. It allowed equal distribution across suits. It enabled a wide variety of combinations for games. It was divisible in ways that suited trick-taking formats and partnership play. There is ongoing debate about whether the 52-card structure intentionally mirrored the 52 weeks of the year. Some later writers suggested that the deck symbolized the calendar. 4 suits for 4 seasons, 13 cards per suit for 13 lunar cycles, 52 total for weeks. While this symmetry is elegant, historical evidence suggests that practicality preceded symbolism. Once the number was established for gameplay reasons, symbolic interpretations may have followed. During this period, Europe was also experiencing shifts in knowledge systems. Astronomical observation improved, calendars were debated and eventually reformed. The Gregorian calendar would be introduced in 1582 to correct drift in the Julian system. Awareness of weeks and months was widespread due to religious observance. It is understandable that people noticed numerical parallels. The deck's portability contributed to its resilience. Soldiers carried cards into military camps. Sailors brought them aboard ships. Long voyages required diversion. Storms confined crews below deck. Cards required no fixed board and minimal space. In such conditions, their value increased. In domestic settings, families integrated card games into social rituals. Winter evenings in Northern Europe were long. Candles or oil lamps provided limited light. Storytelling and games filled time. Cards were small enough to store in chests alongside other household items. They did not demand special furniture or large rooms. Clothing in this era reflected social class and occupation. Artisans wore practical wool garments, leather aprons when working. Merchants displayed modest wealth through finer fabrics. Nobles wore elaborate attire, signaling status. When these individuals held cards, the object itself did not change, but its context did. The same deck could sit on a rough tavern table or on a polished court surface. By the early modern period, taxation systems increasingly recognized card production as a revenue source. Governments imposed stamp duties on decks. Official marks indicated payment of tax. This formal recognition reinforced the deck's status as a common consumer good. It also tied cards into state finance. Philosophical currents of the time emphasized reason and order. Games of chance existed alongside growing interest in probability. Mathematicians in the 17th century began analyzing gambling problems. The fixed structure of a 52-card deck provided fertile ground for calculation. Though poker had not yet formed, the mathematical groundwork for understanding card combinations was emerging. Cultural exchange continued through colonization. European powers established settlements in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Colonists carried familiar objects with them, including cards. In new environments, games adapted to different social conditions. Isolation from European centers sometimes encouraged variation. As the 17th century progressed, the deck had become an ordinary part of life in many regions. It no longer required explanation. Its structure was assumed. 4 suits, 13 ranks, 52 total. That arrangement proved stable enough to cross languages and borders. If one were to observe this period without knowledge of the future, the deck might appear complete, yet its story was still unfolding. The transition from general card play to the specific culture of poker required additional social ingredients. Frontier economies, fluid social hierarchies, and new forms of wagering. At this stage, however, what stands out is continuity. The journey from Eastern paper to European hands was not a single dramatic transfer, but a gradual blending. Artistic styles shifted, suits simplified, production expanded, authority resisted, taxed, and eventually accepted. The deck's endurance depended less on grand design than on adaptability. It fit into existing structures without demanding transformation. It allowed leisure without elaborate infrastructure. It mirrored hierarchy without challenging it directly. You might imagine holding one of those early French-suited decks as it left a print shop in Rouen or Lyon. The ink still faintly fresh, the paper slightly rough. To its maker, it was merchandise. To its buyer, it was entertainment. To history, it was another step toward a standardized object that would later anchor poker tables across continents. By the end of this era, the essential framework was in place. The number 52 had become familiar. The suits were recognizable. The deck had proven its durability across faiths, classes, and climates. What remained was not the invention of structure, but the invention of new ways to use it. That transformation would come in another world, under different pressures, among people whose ambitions and risks would shape a distinct game called poker. By the time the deck of 52 cards had settled into recognizable form across much of Europe, it was no longer a novelty. It was familiar enough to provoke regulation, ordinary enough to appear in inventories, and versatile enough to move between social classes without resistance. Yet familiarity did not mean comfort. Authorities continued to watch it closely. In many European cities of the 16th and 17th centuries, municipal records reveal a pattern: temporary prohibitions, renewed permissions, and periodic taxation. This rhythm reflected tension rather than outright rejection. Leaders were less concerned with the design of the cards than with the behaviors they encouraged. Gambling remained the central worry. The political climate of this era was defined by consolidation of state power. Monarchies sought greater administrative control. Standing armies required funding. Bureaucracies expanded. Taxation became more systematic. Every manufactured object represented potential revenue. Cards, inexpensive and widely used, were ideal candidates for stamp duties. France provides a clear example. By the 17th century, card production was regulated through licensed workshops. Official stamps marked tax compliance. Unauthorized printing was punishable. This system did not suppress card use, it formalized it. The state acknowledged that cards were embedded in daily life and chose to benefit from that reality. Religious authorities, meanwhile, approached the matter with more nuance than popular memory sometimes suggests. Sermons and moral treatises warned against excessive wagering. Preachers criticized the moral hazards of idleness and greed. Yet few theological writings treated the cards themselves as inherently corrupt. The moral focus remained on human conduct. This distinction mattered. It allowed the object to persist even under moral scrutiny. A deck could sit harmlessly in a household drawer or become a source of ruin, depending on circumstance. Responsibility lay with the player. In urban centers, social tensions were visible in everyday settings. Markets bustled with trade. Artisans competed for commissions. Apprentices navigated uncertain futures. Economic inequality was pronounced. For some, gambling offered escape or hope of sudden gain. For others, it threatened stability. Taverns continued to function as informal social hubs. In England, alehouses multiplied. In France, cabarets and inns hosted travellers and locals alike. The lighting was dim, the air often thick with smoke from hearth fires. Card games occupied tables in corners or near windows where daylight reached. Wagers ranged from modest to reckless. Cards were also present in more controlled environments. Gentlemen's clubs in England began to appear in the late 17th century. These were spaces of conversation and calculated risk. Members were often merchants, politicians, or professionals. Here, gambling could be significant. Losses affected estates and reputations. The stakes were social as much as financial. At the same time, domestic life incorporated cards in quieter ways. Families gathered after evening meals. Women participated in card play alongside men, especially in structured trick-taking games. The object did not belong exclusively to male or public spheres. It entered private routines. The structure of the deck itself remained stable. 4 suits, each with 13 ranks. The symmetry allowed for consistent rule-making across games. The ace's position, sometimes high, sometimes low, added flexibility. Face cards retained hierarchical imagery. Kings wore crowns and carried symbols of authority. Queens appeared less frequently in earlier decks but gained prominence over time. Clothing styles depicted on the face cards evolved subtly with fashion trends. Renaissance attire gave way to Baroque flourishes. Doublets, lace collars, plumed hats. These details appeared stylized but recognizable. The cards reflected contemporary visual language, reinforcing their familiarity. Economically, card production became a specialized trade in certain regions. Towns such as Nuremberg and Paris developed reputations for quality decks. Printers balanced artistry with efficiency. Color was applied using stencils, usually red and black, to simplify production. The choice of these 2 colors further reduced cost and standardized appearance. The simplicity of red and black had practical consequences for gameplay. Visual contrast improved clarity. Even in low light, players could distinguish suits quickly. This mattered in environments where illumination was limited to candles or oil lamps. As European powers expanded overseas, decks traveled with sailors and soldiers. On long voyages, structured games provided distraction from monotony and anxiety. Ships were enclosed spaces. Discipline was strict, but leisure time existed. Cards required no elaborate setup. A small wooden crate could hold dozens of decks. In colonies across the Americas, European settlers carried their gaming traditions with them. The political and social contexts were different. Frontier conditions meant looser enforcement of regulations. Formal oversight was limited. In such settings, gambling sometimes intensified. Wagering could involve not only money but land claims, goods, or services. Religious attitudes in colonial societies varied. Puritan communities in New England, for example, discouraged gambling and games associated with idleness. Yet even there, informal play persisted. In more diverse colonies, especially those engaged in trade and port activity, card games were commonplace. The deck's numerical structure began to attract intellectual curiosity during the 17th century. Mathematicians such as Pierre de Fermat and Blaise Pascal analyzed problems of probability related to gambling. Their correspondence laid foundations for probability theory. Although they focused on dice as well as cards, the fixed structure of 52 cards offered a clear framework for calculation. The development of probability theory did not immediately alter everyday card play. Most players relied on intuition and experience. Yet over time, awareness of odds influenced strategy. The deck's consistency enabled repeatable outcomes. This reliability strengthened its appeal. Political upheavals of the 17th century civil wars in England, revolutions in France later on, religious conflicts across Europe did not diminish card use. In fact, periods of instability sometimes increased reliance on familiar routines. Games offered temporary order within uncertainty. The symbolism of suits remained open to interpretation. Some writers proposed allegorical meanings: spades as swords or military force, hearts as clergy or love, diamonds as merchants or wealth, clubs as agriculture or labor. These associations varied and were rarely standardized. They reflected attempts to read broader social order into a simple design. Whether or not such symbolism guided original design, the deck accommodated it. 4 suits could represent many groupings. This flexibility contributed to the enduring appeal of the structure. By the 18th century, the Enlightenment reshaped intellectual life. Rationality and empirical observation gained prominence. Coffee houses in cities like London and Paris hosted debate. Newspapers circulated ideas widely. Card games fit into this culture as structured contests governed by rules. In Britain, games such as whist gained popularity. Whist relied heavily on partnership and memory. Its rules were consistent with a 52-card deck. The game's spread reinforced the standard deck structure. Variations that required different counts became less practical. Clubs dedicated to card play emerged. Membership conferred status. Gambling debts could be severe. Social reputations were intertwined with gaming skill. Yet these were controlled environments compared to the informal settings of taverns or frontier settlements. Clothing in the 18th century reflected growing consumer culture. Textiles were more varied. Middle-class families could afford better garments. Domestic interiors improved. Cards were sometimes stored in decorative cases. The object, once fragile and roughly handled, became integrated into refined settings. Governments continued to collect taxes on card production. In Britain, a duty on playing cards existed for centuries. Official stamps appeared on the ace of spades to indicate tax payment. This practice persisted well into the 19th century. The ace of spades, already a distinctive card, became associated with authority due to its role as tax marker. This small administrative detail illustrates how deeply the deck had entered economic systems. It was no longer marginal. It was monitored, regulated, and financially significant. Social tensions surrounding gambling never disappeared. Pamphlets criticized reckless play. Debts led to duels or imprisonment, yet moderation remained the prevailing advice rather than abolition. The deck survived because it could be used responsibly. By this stage, the 52-card deck was effectively standardized across much of Europe and its colonies. Alternative suit systems persisted regionally, but the French pattern dominated international trade. The structure was stable enough to support new games without structural alteration. What had begun as an imported curiosity had become a cultural constant. It had weathered religious criticism, economic shifts, technological change, and political turbulence. Its endurance lay in its adaptability and simplicity. If one pauses to consider this period, it becomes clear that the deck did not impose itself upon society. Rather, society shaped it incrementally. Authorities taxed it. Artisans simplified it. Players refined its use. Mathematicians analysed it. By the end of the 18th century, the stage was set for a transformation that would occur not in European courts, but in the developing United States. There, a particular combination of frontier conditions, river trade, and diverse immigrant traditions would reshape card play into something distinct. The object remained the same: 52 cards, 4 suits, 13 ranks each. But the context would change dramatically. In that new environment, risk would take on different meaning, and the game of poker would begin to form. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the deck of 52 cards crossed into a world undergoing profound change. The Atlantic economy was expanding. Empires were competing for territory and trade. Revolutions had unsettled political hierarchies in America and France. New republics emerged with different assumptions about status and opportunity. In this shifting landscape, familiar objects acquired new roles. The early United States was not yet a unified cultural space. Coastal cities such as Philadelphia, New York, and Charleston maintained strong commercial ties to Europe. Inland territories remained loosely organized. River systems, particularly the Mississippi and its tributaries, served as primary arteries of transport. Goods moved by flatboat and steamboat. Along these routes, communities developed quickly and unpredictably. Life on the American frontier differed from established European towns. Settlements were often temporary at first. Wooden structures replaced stone. Social institutions lagged behind population growth. Legal oversight was inconsistent. In such environments, personal reputation and visible confidence carried weight. Immigrants from various European regions brought card traditions with them. French settlers in Louisiana contributed games with bluffing elements. English colonists introduced structured trick-taking games. German communities carried their own suit systems and habits. In this mixture, new combinations emerged. One early American card game known as poke, likely derived from the French game poke or the German poken, incorporated betting and bluffing. It was played with a smaller deck at first, often 20 cards removing lower ranks. This compact structure suited fast play and heightened risk. Over time, as the standard 52-card deck became more available and widely recognized, poker absorbed it fully. The social climate of early 19th century America emphasized mobility. The idea that one could rise through initiative and risk-taking became culturally significant. Land speculation, trade ventures, and migration westward involved uncertainty. Gambling mirrored these broader economic patterns. Riverboats became symbolic of this era. Steamboats traveled between port towns, carrying cotton, grain, passengers, and news. Onboard life included long stretches of monotony, punctuated by brief arrivals. Card tables formed in cabins and saloons. Players included merchants, laborers, professional gamblers, and occasionally wealthy travelers. Clothing in these settings reflected varied origins. A river trader might wear a linen shirt and waistcoat. A gambler might adopt more polished attire, signaling credibility and success. Boots were common. Hats differed by region and occupation. Cards passed between hands regardless of background. Poker's defining element, bluffing, distinguished it from many earlier European games. In trick-taking games, success depended primarily on memory and partnership coordination. In poker, a player could project strength or weakness independent of actual cards. This psychological layer aligned with frontier culture, where self-presentation influenced opportunity. Economic pressures shaped participation. In developing towns, cash was not always abundant. Wagers could involve gold coins, banknotes, livestock, or even promises. Gambling sometimes escalated beyond prudence, yet poker also developed rules that structured betting rounds and hand rankings, preventing chaos. The fixed 52-card deck proved adaptable to poker's evolving structure. The variety of combinations allowed for differentiated hand strengths. Pairs, 3 of a kind, straights, flushes, these rankings emerged gradually. Their mathematical hierarchy relied on the consistent number of suits and ranks. The deck's symmetry enabled probability assessment. even if players calculated intuitively. Political authority in frontier regions often struggled to regulate gambling. Some states attempted prohibition. Enforcement remained uneven. In port cities like New Orleans, gambling houses operated openly at times. In others, play occurred privately to avoid scrutiny. Religious communities continued to express concern. Ministers warned congregations about moral risk. Yet, the cultural narrative of individual freedom complicated regulation. The balance between personal liberty and communal order was debated frequently in the young republic. Industrialization began to influence card production during this period. American manufacturers established printing operations capable of large-scale output. Improvements in paper quality increased durability. Corners of cards, once square and prone to bending, were rounded to prevent wear and facilitate shuffling. These practical innovations supported poker's popularity. The visual design of cards also evolved. Double-headed court cards appeared in the 19th century, allowing players to view faces without rotating the card. This design improvement was subtle but significant in games requiring discretion. Indices, small numbers, and suit symbols in corners were later added to aid quick recognition. Urban centers in America grew rapidly. New York, Boston, and Chicago expanded. Saloons in western towns hosted diverse clientele. Poker moved easily between environments. It required only a deck and participants willing to risk. The cultural perception of poker began to diverge from other card games. It was associated with boldness and calculation. Stories circulated about professional gamblers who traveled town to town, relying on skill and deception. Some exaggerated reputations, others cultivated them deliberately. Economic cycles influenced gambling behavior. During periods of prosperity, stakes rose. During downturns, desperation sometimes increased participation. Cards offered both entertainment and potential financial shift. The Civil War introduced another context for poker's spread. Soldiers on both Union and Confederate sides played cards during downtime. Camps were often monotonous between engagements. Poker required minimal equipment and provided mental engagement. Soldiers carried decks home after the war, further embedding the game in American culture. Clothing and living conditions in military camps were harsh. Uniforms wore thin. Tents provided limited shelter. Food rations varied. Within these constraints, card games offered familiarity. The structure of the 52-card deck remained constant even amid uncertainty. By the late 19th century, poker had diversified into variants: draw poker, stud poker, and others. Each used the same standard deck but modified dealing patterns and betting structures. The adaptability of 52 cards proved essential. No structural change was required, only rule adjustments. Railroads replaced some river routes, connecting inland towns more efficiently. Gambling followed rail lines. Saloons near stations attracted travelers. The American West, often romanticized later, was complex. It included ranchers, miners, merchants, and families seeking stability. Poker tables existed alongside daily labor. Government attitudes toward gambling fluctuated. Some territories legalized certain forms for revenue, others imposed bans. Enforcement varied with local politics. The deck itself remained neutral, its legitimacy dependent on context. Technological advances in printing improved card quality further. Companies such as the United States Playing Card Company, founded in the late 19th century, standardized design and distribution. Brand identity emerged. Quality control reduced irregularities that could be exploited by cheaters. Cheating was an ongoing concern. Marked cards, stacked decks, and sleight of hand were documented. Professional gamblers guarded reputations carefully. Trust at the table mattered. The standardized deck aided fairness by limiting variation. Social stratification influenced who played openly. In elite clubs, poker coexisted with other games. In working-class saloons, it offered escape. Women participated in domestic settings and occasionally in public venues, though gender norms limited visibility. As America industrialized further, Leisure time shifted. Factory schedules structured daily rhythm. Urban entertainment expanded to include theatres and organised sports. Poker retained appeal because it required minimal infrastructure. It could adapt to home, club or casino. The symbolism of the 52-card deck became intertwined with American identity. It represented risk, opportunity, and calculated ambition. Yet its structure remained rooted in centuries-old European development. If one reflects quietly on this transformation, it is striking that an object shaped by medieval artisans could become central to frontier culture. The continuity of 4 suits and 13 ranks bridged contexts that otherwise differed sharply. By the dawn of the 20th century, poker was firmly established in the United States. It had evolved from imported influences into a distinctly American game. Its mathematical structure relied entirely on the standardized 52-card deck. The world around it was changing again. Industrialization intensified. Urban populations surged. Mass media expanded. Soon, poker would move from saloons and private tables into more formalized gambling establishments. Through all these changes, the deck remained constant. Its durability lay not in dramatic reinvention, but in steady reliability. 52 cards, arranged in 4 suits, had proven sufficient for centuries of adaptation. And so the story moved forward from frontier tables into modern cities, carrying with it the quiet order established long before poker itself had a name. As the 19th century settled into its later decades, poker was no longer confined to riverboats or frontier saloons. It entered drawing rooms, private clubs, and increasingly formal gambling establishments. The United States was becoming more urban and industrial. Railroads connected coasts. Telegraph lines transmitted information quickly. With these changes, poker adjusted its setting without altering its foundation. The standard 52-card deck was now firmly entrenched in manufacturing systems. Card companies refined printing techniques to improve consistency. The introduction of smooth finishes allowed cards to slide easily across tables. Rounded corners prevented rapid wear. Decorative backs were added to make it more difficult to identify cards from behind. These practical innovations addressed real problems faced at tables where money changed hands. In cities such as New York and Chicago, gambling houses operated in fluctuating legal environments. Some periods tolerated them, others drove them underground. Poker tables appeared in back rooms behind legitimate storefronts. Operators sought to balance profit with discretion. A structured deck with predictable combinations allowed house rules to remain stable even as laws shifted. Economic inequality widened during the Gilded Age. Industrial magnates accumulated wealth. Immigrant laborers filled factories. Urban neighborhoods became densely populated. In these crowded cities, leisure took different forms depending on income. For the wealthy, private card rooms offered controlled environments. For workers, neighborhood saloons provided communal tables. Clothing styles reflected social divisions. Wealthy men wore tailored suits and polished shoes. Working-class players might arrive in worn jackets and heavy boots after long shifts. The deck did not discriminate. It passed between hands without regard for class, yet the consequences of loss varied greatly. Poker's structure continued to evolve. 5-card draw became common. Players received a complete hand, discarded unwanted cards, and drew replacements. Betting rounds occurred before and after the draw. This format emphasized both chance and judgment. Bluffing gained prominence. The deck's full 52-card structure ensured adequate unpredictability. Probability theory, developed centuries earlier, now began influencing public understanding more directly. Newspapers occasionally printed mathematical discussions of gambling odds. While most players relied on instinct, a growing minority approached poker analytically. The deck's fixed size allowed for precise calculation of combinations. Cultural attitudes toward gambling remained ambivalent. Reform movements in the late 19th century targeted vice districts in many American cities. Religious leaders advocated moral reform. At the same time, gambling establishments contributed to local economies. tension between regulation and tolerance persisted. Poker's reputation fluctuated. In some circles, it was associated with skill and intellect. In others, with deceit and ruin. Literature of the period sometimes portrayed gamblers as charismatic but morally ambiguous figures. The deck, unchanged in structure, served both interpretations. In the American West, mining towns and cattle hubs still hosted visible poker games. The myth of the lone gambler facing danger at the table grew in popular imagination. Yet daily life in these towns was practical and labor-intensive. Ranchers rose early, miners descended into shafts. Poker took place in evenings, often as a measured pastime rather than a dramatic spectacle. As the 20th century approached, technological advances reshaped entertainment. Electricity illuminated urban spaces. Extended hours of activity became possible. Card rooms benefited from brighter lighting, reducing errors and disputes. The red and black suits remained easy to distinguish under electric bulbs. The emergence of casinos in places such as Nevada later in the century formalized poker further. Casinos standardized table sizes, betting limits, and dealer roles. The deck itself remained the familiar 52 cards, often supplemented with jokers for other games but excluded from standard poker play. The absence of jokers in poker reinforced reliance on the classic structure. During the early 20th century, major global events influenced leisure habits. World War I and later World War II disrupted economies and daily routines. Soldiers once again carried decks into camps and transport ships. Poker offered continuity. Its rules required no translation across units. The deck's simplicity allowed quick organization of games in barracks or aboard naval vessels. Clothing and equipment in military settings were utilitarian. Uniforms were standardized. Equipment was compact. A deck of cards fit easily into a pocket. In such contexts, the deck symbolized normalcy. It linked soldiers to civilian life beyond the front lines. After the wars, economic growth in the United States expanded middle-class leisure. Suburban homes became common. Families gathered around kitchen tables. Poker nights among friends became social rituals. Chips replaced improvised wagers. The game adapted to domestic comfort. Television and later digital media transformed poker's public image. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, televised tournaments displayed professional players calculating odds and managing expressions. Cameras revealed hole cards to audiences while preserving secrecy at the table. The deck's structure allowed consistent tournament rules across events. Globalization spread poker beyond American borders in new ways. International tournaments attracted players from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Online platforms allowed digital simulation of the 52-card deck. Algorithms shuffled virtual cards using random number generators, replicating physical randomness. Despite technological transformation, the underlying structure remained intact. 4 suits, 13 ranks each, 52 total. Even digital platforms retain the familiar imagery of hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades. The persistence of this design demonstrates its resilience. Mathematics and psychology became central to high-level play. Professional players studied probability tables and opponent behavior. Yet at home tables, many continued to play casually. The deck accommodated both expertise and informal enjoyment. Regulation in modern societies remains complex. Some jurisdictions license casinos and online platforms. Others restrict gambling heavily. Debates center on economic benefit, addiction risk, and personal responsibility. The deck itself remains a neutral instrument within these discussions. Manufacturers continue refining physical cards. Plastic-coated decks resist wear. Designs vary, but standardization ensures compatibility across games. The ace of spades often retains distinctive ornamentation, a remnant of historical tax stamps and branding practices. Cultural symbolism of the deck has expanded. The 4 suits appear in fashion, art, and advertising. The image of a royal flush conveys excellence even to those unfamiliar with detailed rules. Such symbolism depends entirely on the shared understanding of the 52-card structure. If one pauses to consider the path traveled, it is remarkable how little the physical deck has changed while the world around it has transformed dramatically. From medieval workshops to digital screens, the same numerical balance persists. The story of poker cards is therefore not solely about gambling. It is about adaptability within constraint. The deck's fixed composition created boundaries within which countless variations could develop. That balance between limitation and possibility proved enduring. As modern life accelerates and entertainment options multiply, the deck continues to occupy tables and screens. Its structure links players across centuries. When a hand is dealt, the same combinations exist that existed in Renaissance Europe and frontier America. The reasons for 52 cards, then, are rooted in practicality, production efficiency, mathematical balance, and gradual standardization rather than single acts of invention. 4 suits survived because they were manageable. 13 ranks provided depth without excess. Together, they formed a system flexible enough to sustain centuries of play. Perhaps this is why the deck endures quietly. It does not demand attention. It waits in drawers, in casino racks, in digital interfaces. When picked up, it offers structure within uncertainty. History cannot change, but our understanding of it can. And when you next hold a deck of cards, you might consider the long chain of hands that shaped its form not through grand design, but through steady use. The 20th century did not simplify the world, yet the 52-card deck remained simple. As nations industrialized, urbanized, and then entered an age of mass communication, the small stack of printed rectangles continued to serve its purpose without alteration. Its endurance during periods of acceleration reveals something about how deeply its structure had settled into habit. By the early decades of the century, large manufacturers in the United States and Europe dominated production. Companies invested in machinery capable of cutting, printing, coating, and packaging decks in enormous quantities. Paper quality improved through chemical processes that reduced impurities. Cardstock became smoother and more durable. The physical feel of the deck, its weight, its flexibility, was refined intentionally. Mass production had social consequences. A standardized deck became available at modest cost to almost anyone. Rural households, urban apartments, and military barracks all used nearly identical cards. Uniformity strengthened shared rules. When strangers met at a table, no negotiation about suit systems or rank order was necessary. The political climate of the early 20th century was marked by instability. Empires collapsed after World War I. New borders were drawn. Economic depression followed in the 1930s. During hardship, inexpensive forms of entertainment gained importance. A deck of cards required no electricity and minimal space. Families affected by unemployment gathered at kitchen tables to pass evenings with games. During the Great Depression in the United States, gambling laws varied by state. Nevada legalized casino gambling in 1931, seeking economic stimulus. Las Vegas began its transformation from remote settlement to entertainment center. Poker rooms developed alongside other games of chance. The fixed 52-card deck allowed casinos to standardize tables, train dealers, and maintain consistent house procedures. World War II once again dispersed decks globally. Soldiers from different regions encountered each other in shared camps. Poker served as common ground. Cultural differences mattered less when the structure of the deck was familiar. In prisoner of war camps, improvised cards were sometimes created from scraps of paper, replicating the standard 52 structure from memory. This suggests how fully the pattern had embedded itself in consciousness. After the war, economic growth in North America and parts of Europe expanded consumer culture. Suburban development created new social spaces. Informal poker nights became routine gatherings among friends and colleagues. Chips, felt-covered tables, and standardized rulebooks increased consistency. Television altered poker's visibility in the later 20th century. Tournaments such as the World Series of Poker, established in 1,970 inches Las Vegas, presented the game as competitive sport. Broadcasts explained hand rankings and probabilities to viewers. The audience learned to recognize a flush or full house instinctively. This mass education reinforced the centrality of the 52-card deck. Mathematics and psychology increasingly defined professional play. Players studied expected value, pot odds, and behavioral patterns. Books analyzed optimal strategies. Yet the deck's structure did not change to accommodate this sophistication. It had already provided the necessary framework centuries earlier. Meanwhile, other regions of the world developed their own relationships with poker. In Europe, established gambling traditions integrated American-style poker into casinos and clubs. In Asia, card games with different structures existed long before poker's arrival, yet the 52-card deck found acceptance in international settings. Digital technology introduced a new phase. Online poker platforms simulated decks using random number generators designed to approximate true randomness. Players no longer touched physical cards, yet the visual representation remained the same. Hearts were red, spades black. The virtual deck retained 4 suits and 13 ranks per suit. The transition to digital environments raised new regulatory questions. Governments debated jurisdiction, taxation, and consumer protection. Some countries licensed online platforms, others restricted access. Through these debates, the structure of the deck remained constant, serving as the common element across platforms. Cultural symbolism of poker deepened. The phrase "ace up the sleeve" entered common language, referring to hidden advantage. The image of the royal flush ace, king, queen, jack, and 10 of the same suit became shorthand for excellence. Such symbolism depended entirely on the stable structure of 52 cards. Educational institutions occasionally used card probability to teach statistics. Students calculated the likelihood of drawing particular hands. The deck functioned as a practical model for understanding randomness. Its symmetry and fixed composition made it ideal for instruction. Manufacturers continued minor refinements. Plastic cards became common in casinos due to durability and resistance to marking. Security features were added to prevent tampering. Designs varied aesthetically, yet compatibility with the standard structure was maintained. Economic pressures and technological shifts did not eliminate informal home games. Even as digital entertainment expanded, many people valued face-to-face play. The tactile act of shuffling cards, stacking chips, and observing expressions retained appeal. The deck's physical presence offered contrast to screens. Global tournaments in the early 21st century demonstrated poker's international reach. Players from diverse backgrounds competed under identical rules. The commonality of the 52-card deck enabled this universality. No translation was required for suits or ranks. Cultural attitudes toward gambling continued to oscillate. Concerns about addiction prompted regulation and public health initiatives. At the same time, governments recognized tax revenue potential. Poker existed within this dual framework of opportunity and risk. In academic settings, scholars examined poker as a study in decision-making under uncertainty. Economists analyzed strategic equilibrium. Psychologists explored bluffing and perception. The fixed deck provided consistent experimental conditions. Once again, centuries-old standardization proved useful. Despite its global spread, poker did not displace other card games. Bridge, blackjack, and regional variants maintained popularity. All relied on the same 52-card deck. The object supported multiple traditions simultaneously. If one considers the long trajectory from medieval workshops to online platforms, the continuity is striking. While context transformed dramatically, the deck itself required no structural reinvention. Its endurance suggests that the balance of 4 suits and 13 ranks achieved an equilibrium difficult to improve upon. You might reflect for a moment on how rarely this balance is questioned. Few players ask why there are not 5 suits or 60 cards. The structure feels natural precisely because it has been stable for so long. The reasons for 52 cards, when examined closely, are practical rather than mystical. Production efficiency favored simple, symmetrical suits. Gameplay demanded sufficient variety without overwhelming complexity. Mathematical consistency reinforced durability. Symbolic associations with calendars or seasons may have followed, but they were not necessary for survival. As the modern world accelerates, objects that persist unchanged become anchors. The deck of poker cards is one such anchor. It links industrial workers in 19th century factories to digital players in 21st century apartments. It connects Renaissance artisans to televised champions. History cannot change, but our understanding of it can. Perhaps the story of the 52-card deck invites patience. It reminds us that durable forms often emerge gradually, shaped by countless ordinary decisions rather than singular invention. And when the cards are gathered, shuffled, and dealt again, they carry with them not only the possibility of winning or losing, but the quiet weight of centuries of human adaptation. By the time the 21st century settled into its first decades, the 52-card deck had reached a curious position in human life. It was both ancient and modern, both physical and digital, both ordinary and symbolically powerful. Yet its structure remained unchanged. 4 suits, 13 ranks each, 52 in total. To understand why 4 suits endured so firmly, it helps to step back from poker itself and look at the broader human preference for balance and manageable order. Throughout history, systems that survive tend to strike a careful equilibrium between variety and clarity. Too many elements create confusion, too few create monotony. 4 suits achieved a stable middle ground. Earlier European experiments with suit symbols show that variety was possible. German decks with acorns and bells, Spanish decks with cups and swords, Italian patterns with ornate batons, all coexisted for centuries. But the French system, hearts, diamonds, clubs and spades, offered visual economy. The shapes were simple enough to carve into wood blocks quickly. They were easily distinguished at a glance. They required only 2 ink colours, red and black. In practical terms, this mattered greatly. Printing in large quantities depended on speed and consistency. A printer who could produce decks efficiently could sell them more cheaply. A cheaper deck travelled farther, and the more it travelled, the more its pattern became standard. The endurance of 4 suits was therefore tied to economic forces rather than symbolic intention. At the same time, 4 carried familiar resonance within European thought. Medieval medicine described 4 humours. Geography recognized 4 cardinal directions. Theology sometimes organized virtues or evangelists in sets of 4. These parallels may not have dictated design, but they made the number feel intuitively complete. No additional justification was required. The 13 ranks within each suit evolved through gradual simplification. Numbered cards from 1 through 10 provided clear progression. 3 court figures added hierarchy. Earlier decks sometimes used different terminology, knaves instead of jacks, for instance, but the structure stabilized. 13 allowed for extended sequences without overwhelming the player's memory. When multiplied across 4 suits, 13 yielded 52. This total supported diverse game structures. It could be divided evenly among 4 players in many formats. It allowed for combination counts rich enough to create probability depth. Poker's later development relied heavily on this mathematical richness. Consider how hand rankings depend on distribution. A flush requires 5 cards of the same suit. With 4 suits available, the probability can be calculated precisely. Remove or add suits, and the balance shifts dramatically. The current configuration produces tension without predictability. That balance was discovered gradually through repeated use. Industrial production reinforced this equilibrium. By the late 19th century, manufacturers invested in molds, plates, and cutting dies calibrated to the 52-card format. Changing the structure would have required economic disruption. Standardization lowered costs across distribution networks. Once embedded in infrastructure, the number 52 became self-perpetuating. Cultural continuity strengthened the pattern further. Instruction manuals, etiquette guides, and gambling rulebooks all assumed the same deck. Children learned basic card games with parents or grandparents. The structure passed generationally without re-examination. Meanwhile, academic interest in probability expanded. Scholars used the 52-card deck as a model for statistical problems. It became a teaching tool in classrooms. This institutional use further cemented the structure. Students who calculated combinations on paper internalized the number as natural. Poker itself diversified during the 20th century. Variants such as Texas Hold'em and Omaha introduced community cards, altering strategy without changing deck composition. These innovations relied entirely on the stability of 52 cards. The shared pool of cards increased psychological complexity while preserving mathematical consistency. Digital platforms in the early 2000s amplified poker's reach. Online tournaments allowed thousands of players to participate simultaneously. Software shuffled and dealt cards electronically, but always within the same framework. The virtual deck mirrored the physical one precisely. Global tournaments televised high-stakes matches. Viewers learned to recognize hand strengths instantly. Even those unfamiliar with detailed rules understood that four of a kind outranked a full house. The hierarchy depended entirely on the balanced distribution of ranks and suits. Economic forces continued to shape access. Casinos invested in surveillance systems to prevent cheating. Plastic decks replaced paper in high-traffic environments to reduce wear. Security printing minimized marking. Yet no casino altered the count of cards. Compatibility across venues was essential. Socially, poker occupied multiple identities. In corporate boardrooms, executives hosted friendly games to build relationships. In private homes, neighbors gathered casually. In competitive circuits, professionals treated poker as occupation. The deck functioned across all these contexts without modification. Religious and moral debates about gambling persisted in many societies. Some communities discouraged participation, others tolerated or regulated it. Throughout these debates, the deck remained neutral. It could serve games of skill, harmless entertainment, or destructive addiction, depending on use. In educational settings, teachers sometimes used cards to illustrate randomness, permutations, and probability. The simplicity of 4 suits and 13 ranks made explanation accessible. Students learned that the number of possible 5-card hands exceeded 2 million. Such figures impressed upon them the richness hidden within modest structure. Culturally, the suits themselves accumulated layered meanings. Hearts often symbolized affection. Diamonds suggested wealth. Clubs were sometimes interpreted as labor or agriculture. Spades evoked tools or military force. These associations varied by era and region. They were not fixed, but the shapes invited interpretation. It is easy to overlook how rarely the structure has been questioned. Other games have reinvented themselves repeatedly, adding expansions or alternative rule sets. The standard poker deck has resisted alteration. Its stability may reflect a deep human preference for systems that are neither too sparse nor too intricate. If you imagine holding the deck now, it feels inevitable. Yet inevitability is often the product of repeated confirmation. Centuries of use validated the arrangement. Each generation inherited the structure and found no compelling reason to replace it. Technological change continues. Augmented reality and virtual reality platforms experiment with immersive poker environments. Players can sit at simulated tables across continents, yet the cards displayed in those environments remain the same 52. Economic disparities still influence participation. High-stakes tournaments attract wealthy sponsors. Casual home games require little investment. The deck accommodates both extremes. It does not impose scale, it adapts to it. The endurance of 4 suits and 52 cards reveals how durable design emerges from convergence rather than decree. Printers sought efficiency. Players sought manageable complexity. Mathematicians valued consistency. Governments taxed production. Over time, these forces aligned around a shared structure. If the number 52 carries symbolic echoes of weeks in a year, that connection may be secondary. The deeper reason lies in functional balance. A deck must be large enough to sustain uncertainty, yet small enough to handle physically and cognitively. 52 achieves that balance effectively. Perhaps that is why the deck has remained unchanged while societies transformed around it. Industrialization, global conflict, digital revolution all altered daily life profoundly. Yet when cards are shuffled, the same count persists. If the 4 suits and 13 ranks had already settled into a durable structure, the question of 52 still lingered quietly in the background. Not as a controversy, but as a curiosity. Why not 48? Why not 60? Why did this particular total become so deeply rooted that alternatives faded into obscurity? The answer lies less in a single moment of decision and more in accumulation. By the time poker emerged distinctly in 19th century America, the 52-card deck had already endured for generations across Europe. It had proven itself adaptable in games requiring trick-taking, matching, betting, and memory. Any variation from this total required justification strong enough to overcome habit, production cost, and mathematical balance. In earlier centuries, some decks indeed contained different numbers. Certain European regions experimented with shorter packs for specific games. German decks sometimes used 32 cards by removing lower ranks. Spanish-suited decks in parts of Europe also varied in count. These variations persisted regionally because they were tied to specific traditions. Yet for a game like poker, which emphasized combination variety in betting rounds, the full 52 cards offered advantages. A larger deck increased unpredictability. It expanded the number of possible hands dramatically. The more combinations available, the more room existed for strategic nuance. To appreciate the scale, consider that a 5-card hand drawn from a 52-card deck can be formed in over 2.5 million distinct ways. This immense variety sustains suspense. It allows rare hands to remain truly rare. It supports ranking systems that feel meaningful. If the deck were significantly smaller, rare hands would occur more frequently. The tension between expectation and surprise would diminish. If it were significantly larger, cognitive overload might complicate play. 52 strikes a workable equilibrium between these extremes. The structure also accommodates even distribution among multiple players. In many card games, the ability to deal equal numbers of cards without remainder simplifies procedure. 52 divides cleanly by 4, allowing 13 cards per player in certain formats. While poker does not always distribute evenly, the underlying divisibility adds versatility. Another factor was manufacturing inertia. By the 18th century, printing plates and cutting equipment were calibrated to produce decks of 52. Changing that structure would have required retooling workshops. Economic logic discourages such changes when demand is steady. Symbolic interpretations of 52 gained popularity later. Writers in the 19th and early 20th centuries observed that 52 corresponded to the number of weeks in a year. They noted that 13 ranks paralleled 13 lunar cycles, 4 suits aligned with 4 seasons. These associations were elegant and memorable. Yet, historical documentation suggests that practicality preceded symbolism. The French pattern became dominant because it simplified printing. The number 13 per suit stabilized because it balanced numeric progression with manageable hierarchy. 52 followed naturally from multiplication. Symbolic meaning may have been attached afterward, as human beings often search for patterns that resonate beyond utility. In Victorian England, where fascination with hidden meaning flourished, the deck structure attracted speculative interpretation. Some connected it to astrology or numerology. Others dismissed such connections as coincidence. The cards themselves remained indifferent to interpretation. As poker matured in America, players did not debate deck size philosophically. They accepted the standard pack as given. Rulebooks assumed its presence. When jokers were introduced into other card games in the 19th century, Poker largely excluded them to preserve established rankings. The decision reinforced fidelity to 52. The rise of casinos in the 20th century formalized adherence further. Tournament rules required standard decks to ensure fairness across tables. House procedures included replacing decks regularly to prevent marking. The 52-card pack became institutionalized. Mathematical study deepened appreciation for the deck's balance. Probability calculations demonstrated how hand rankings depended on precise distribution of suits and ranks. Remove one card, and odds shift. Add one, and rare combinations change frequency. Stability was valuable. Educational curricula sometimes used the deck as a practical model for combinatorics. Students learned factorial notation by calculating possible shuffles. The famous assertion that a well-shuffled deck is likely in an order never seen before illustrated the astronomical number of permutations possible. With 52 cards, 52 factorial. This figure far exceeds the number of atoms in many familiar scales of matter. Such comparisons highlight the richness hidden in simple structure. Yet despite these impressive numbers, the deck remains physically modest. It fits comfortably in a hand. It can be shuffled, cut, and dealt without machinery. The human scale of the object contributes to its longevity. Culturally, the deck crossed boundaries beyond gambling. Magicians used it for performance. Card tricks relied on predictable structure and sleight of hand. The audience's familiarity with 52 cards enhanced surprise. Illusion depended on shared understanding. In literature and film, the deck often symbolizes risk or destiny. A character holding a winning hand reflects triumph. A losing hand suggests vulnerability. These narratives assume knowledge of rankings rooted in the 52-card system. In military history, survival kits issued to pilots sometimes included decks printed with maps hidden within layers, allowing escape if captured. The choice of playing cards for such purposes reflected their ubiquity. Soldiers recognized them instantly. Again, the standard deck served practical needs beyond leisure. As digital technology advanced, software developers replicated the exact 52-card configuration. Online platforms relied on mathematical algorithms to simulate shuffling fairly. Auditing bodies verified randomness. The digital deck preserved traditional hierarchy. Global tournaments standardized rules further. Whether played in Las Vegas, Monte Carlo, or Macau, the deck remained identical. This uniformity facilitated international competition. Players trained in one country could compete in another without structural adjustment. The endurance of 52 therefore rests on several pillars: production efficiency, mathematical balance, institutional reinforcement, cultural familiarity, and practical usability. Each factor strengthened the others over time. If you consider how many alternative systems in human history have faded currencies replaced, measurement units revised, calendars corrected, the persistence of this particular numerical structure stands out. It suggests that once equilibrium between function and familiarity is reached, change becomes unnecessary. The story of 52 is thus not one of deliberate design for cosmic symbolism, but of incremental validation. Each generation inherited the deck, used it successfully, and passed it onward unchanged. Perhaps that is why the question of why 52 surfaces only occasionally. It seems too settled to challenge. Yet examining it reveals how deeply social, economic, and mathematical forces intertwine in shaping everyday objects. When cards are shuffled, the motion feels casual, yet within that motion lies centuries of refinement. The number of cards, the distribution of suits, the hierarchy of ranks, all arrived through adaptation rather than proclamation. Once the number 52 had settled firmly into the structure of the deck, interpretations began to gather around it. Human beings rarely leave patterns uninterpreted. When a number appears stable across generations, it invites connection to other systems of order. In the case of playing cards, especially poker cards, some observers began to notice parallels with the calendar. A year in the Western calendar contains 52 weeks. Each week is divided into 7 days. 13 weeks make up a quarter of the year, aligning roughly with seasons. The deck contains 4 suits. Each suit contains 13 ranks. At a glance, the symmetry is striking. The idea that the deck was intentionally designed as a miniature calendar has appeared in popular explanations for centuries. The 4 suits represent the 4 seasons. The 13 ranks represent the 13 lunar cycles in a year. The 52 total cards represent the weeks. Add the values of the cards together, some have noted, and the sum can be made to reflect 365 with certain conventions. These interpretations are elegant, but historical evidence suggests they emerged after the deck structure had already stabilized. There is no surviving medieval decree stating that card makers designed 52 cards to mirror the year. Instead, printers and players sought functional balance. Once balance was achieved, symbolic meaning followed naturally. This does not make the symbolism irrelevant. It reveals something about cultural thinking. In early modern Europe, awareness of time was shaped by religious calendars. Feast days punctuated labor. Agricultural cycles marked seasons. The weekly rhythm of worship structured community life. A system of 52 units would not have felt unfamiliar. In rural communities, the year was experienced physically. Spring planting, summer harvest, autumn storage, winter rest. 13 weeks per season was a useful approximation, even if imperfect. The deck's division into 4 equal suits resonated with this quarterly rhythm. Urban dwellers, too, measured time carefully. Markets operated on weekly cycles, contracts specified terms by month and year. As literacy expanded, printed calendars became common household items. The concept of 52 weeks was widely understood by the 18th century. Yet card makers were artisans, not cosmologists. Their decisions were influenced more by printing efficiency and gameplay than by metaphysical alignment. The French suit system simplified production. 13 ranks allowed progression and hierarchy. The total emerged logically. Still, symbolic overlays can strengthen attachment. If a deck mirrors the year, even accidentally, it acquires poetic appeal. In the 19th century, when interest in numerology and hidden meaning flourished, such parallels were repeated in pamphlets and parlor discussions. Beyond the calendar interpretation, other symbolic frameworks appeared. Some writers proposed that the suits represented social classes: hearts for clergy, diamonds for merchants, clubs for laborers, spades for military. These associations varied across regions and periods. They reflect attempts to read society into the deck. The face cards also attracted speculation. In certain French decks, kings were named after historical or legendary figures such as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. Whether these identifications were consistent across print runs is debated. What is clear is that viewers enjoyed attaching stories to the images. As poker gained prominence in the 19th century, these symbolic interpretations mattered less at the table. Players were concerned with probability, bluffing, and risk. Yet outside gameplay, cultural narratives persisted. In Victorian households, where moral instruction and symbolic interpretation were common in education, children sometimes learned allegorical meanings attached to everyday objects. Cards could be included in such lessons. The number 52 might be presented as evidence of hidden design within ordinary life. Across the Atlantic, in America, the symbolism of the deck merged with frontier narratives. The ace of spades gained particular visibility. In some military contexts, it was treated as a symbol of power or intimidation. During later conflicts, individual cards sometimes appeared in propaganda or morale-building materials. These uses built on existing familiarity. Mathematics, meanwhile, continued to explore the deck's internal order. Probability theory matured in the 19th and 20th centuries. Scholars analyzed combinations, permutations, and expected values. The deck provided a controlled system for experimentation. The factorial calculation of 52, the number of possible unique shuffles, revealed a scale almost beyond comprehension. Even though players at home did not calculate such figures, awareness that each shuffle likely produced a previously unseen order added subtle depth to the act. The idea that a deck contains within it more possible arrangements than moments in human history is striking, yet the object remains simple. This paradox, vast possibility within modest form, may contribute to its cultural resonance. In modern educational contexts, teachers sometimes use the deck to demonstrate randomness and order simultaneously. A shuffled deck appears chaotic, yet its composition remains fixed. Structure underlies unpredictability. Religious perspectives on gambling have evolved unevenly. Some denominations maintain strict prohibitions. Others adopt more flexible stances. In many cases, the moral discussion centers not on the number of cards, but on the behavior surrounding them. The deck's internal symmetry rarely enters theological debate. In the digital age, calendar symbolism has largely faded from popular discussion. Online players focus on strategy rather than numerology, yet occasional articles revive the idea that the deck encodes the year. These interpretations continue to circulate because they are memorable. If you pause for a moment and imagine the year divided into weeks, and then picture the deck divided into suits, the parallel feels tidy. Whether intentional or not, the alignment offers a sense of completeness. Cultural objects often accumulate meaning beyond their origin. A simple structure can become layered through repetition. The 52-card deck demonstrates how utility and symbolism coexist without contradiction. Consider also how the deck organizes value. The ace can function as low or high depending on the game. This flexibility mirrors broader human systems where rank depends on context. In poker, the ace's dual role increases strategic range without altering structure. The endurance of the 52-card deck through centuries of political upheaval, technological revolution, and cultural change suggests that its balance satisfies multiple needs at once. It supports complex games. It invites interpretation. It remains easy to produce and transport. You might ask yourself, quietly, whether stability itself carries meaning. Does a structure persist because it reflects cosmic order, or because it works effectively? Perhaps the distinction matters less than the outcome. In practical terms, the reasons for 52 are grounded in convergence, economic efficiency, mathematical depth, ease of division, and historical continuity. Symbolic associations with the calendar may have strengthened attachment, but they were not required for survival. As the symbolic interpretations of the deck accumulated, another element quietly matured within its structure: the face cards. Kings, queens, and jacks did not merely decorate the deck, they carried with them centuries of political imagination. Their presence reflected how societies understood hierarchy, authority, and role. In the earliest European decks derived from Islamic models, court cards did not always include queens. Some early Mamluk decks featured 3 court ranks: king, deputy king, and second deputy. These were represented through calligraphy rather than human images. When European artisans adapted the deck, they gradually introduced figurative representations and modified ranks to reflect familiar structures. By the late medieval period, the standard 3 court cards per suit, king, queen, and jack, were common in many regions. The king's role was straightforward. Europe was dominated by monarchies. The king card typically depicted a crowned ruler holding a sword, orb, or scepter. His clothing mirrored contemporary royal fashion. Fur-lined cloaks, ornate armor, and symbolic regalia emphasized authority. The queen's inclusion is more complex. In some early decks, her role was less prominent or absent. Over time, particularly in French patterns, the queen became a stable feature. This inclusion reflected shifting social visibility of royal women. Queens wielded political influence through marriage alliances, regency, and court presence. Their appearance in the deck signaled recognition of their place within hierarchy. The jack, originally called the knave in English, represented a subordinate court figure, often a servant or soldier. The term jack gained popularity partly to avoid confusion with the king when abbreviated in writing. The jack's depiction often included weapons or symbolic gestures indicating service or readiness. These three court ranks created a miniature social ladder within each suit. Their hierarchy was clear: king above queen above jack. This structure mirrored broader social systems in which authority descended through defined levels. French card makers sometimes assigned legendary names to kings in printed decks. One pattern labeled the King of Spades as David, referencing the biblical king, the King of Hearts as Charlemagne, the King of Diamonds as Julius Caesar, and the King of Clubs as Alexander. Whether these identifications were universally recognized or varied by printer is uncertain. What matters is that players could imagine historical figures embodied in familiar cards. This blending of legend and leisure reflects a broader cultural practice. Objects used in daily life often carried echoes of historical memory. Even if players did not consciously consider these names during gameplay, the association existed within printed tradition. Clothing styles depicted on face cards evolved gradually with fashion trends. Renaissance attire gave way to Baroque ornamentation, then to simplified forms in mass production. Yet the essential posture profile, or mirrored double-headed image, remained consistent. The introduction of double-headed court cards in the 19th century represented a significant design innovation. Earlier decks required players to rotate cards to view the figure upright. This movement could reveal hand strength unintentionally. Double-headed designs solved this problem elegantly. Each card displayed mirrored imagery so that orientation did not matter. This adjustment highlights how poker's rise influenced design. Games requiring secrecy encouraged visual modifications that preserved discretion. Indices, small numbers, and suit symbols in the corners were added later to allow players to fan cards while keeping values visible. Again, the 52 card structure remained unchanged, only usability improved. Culturally, face cards invited interpretation beyond gameplay. The king symbolized authority and command. The queen suggested influence and refinement. The jack embodied youth or subordinate service. These archetypes resonated in storytelling and literature. In American frontier settings, the face cards sometimes took on reputations reflecting local attitudes. The King of Hearts, for example, is sometimes nicknamed the Suicide King because of the sword appearing behind his head in certain designs. This detail likely arose from artistic evolution rather than narrative intent, yet players attached stories to it. The ace, though not a face card, also gained prominence. In some games it ranked low, in others high. In poker, its flexibility enhanced strategy. The ace of spades, in particular, acquired visual distinction due to historical tax stamps placed upon it in Britain. Manufacturers later elaborated its design as branding space. Political climates influenced how face cards were perceived. During revolutionary periods, images of monarchy could carry symbolic weight. In France, after the Revolution, some decks experimented with replacing kings and queens with allegorical figures, such as liberty or justice. Yet the traditional court structure returned because it was familiar and functional. This episode demonstrates again how resilience often favors established patterns. Even when political systems changed, the deck's internal hierarchy proved adaptable enough to survive symbolic alteration attempts. As poker expanded internationally, face cards crossed cultural boundaries. In countries without monarchic tradition, the king and queen remained recognizable symbols of rank. Their meaning was abstracted from specific political allegiance. In the 20th century, graphic design modernized card imagery. Cleaner lines, standardized colors, and consistent proportions became common, yet the basic identities of king, queen, and jack remained intact. Psychologically, face cards carry weight in gameplay. Holding a king or queen feels different from holding a low-numbered card. The human image reinforces perceived strength. This perception influences decision-making, even when probabilities remain constant. Educational psychologists have observed that visual cues affect memory and attention. The distinct appearance of face cards aids recall during play. This cognitive advantage may contribute subtly to their enduring presence. In casinos, Dealers are trained to recognize card values quickly. The standardized imagery across decks reduces confusion. International tournaments rely on consistent recognition across languages. The King of Hearts is visually distinct regardless of native tongue. Modern designers occasionally produce thematic decks with alternative artwork, historical figures, fictional characters, abstract motifs. Yet for competitive poker, traditional designs dominate. Familiarity reduces distraction. It is interesting to consider that while political authority has transformed radically since the medieval period, the deck still organizes hierarchy through monarchy imagery. The persistence suggests that symbolic language can outlast its original context. If you hold a king card today, it does not imply endorsement of monarchy. It signals rank within a structured system. That abstraction allows continuity across cultures and centuries. The face cards illustrate how everyday objects preserve echoes of historical worldview. The social hierarchies of medieval Europe are embedded quietly in modern poker tables, yet the object functions seamlessly within contemporary democratic societies. Perhaps this reveals something about how cultural artifacts adapt. They shed specific political meaning while retaining structural utility. The king becomes a rank rather than a ruler. The queen becomes a value rather than a sovereign. As poker settled into the 20th century with its structure intact and its imagery refined, the environment surrounding the game continued to change in ways that revealed both its resilience and its vulnerabilities. The 52-card deck did not evolve further in form, but the stakes associated with it grew larger, more visible, and more complex. In the early decades of the 20th century, gambling culture in the United States operated in uneven legal terrain. Some cities tolerated gambling districts, while others pursued reform campaigns to suppress them. Political machines in urban centers occasionally protected gambling houses in exchange for revenue or influence. Elsewhere, law enforcement raided card rooms in response to public pressure. Economic forces shaped participation. During periods of financial instability, particularly the Great Depression, gambling sometimes increased among those seeking sudden reversal of fortune. For others, it remained modest recreation. The deck did not discriminate between desperation and leisure. It offered the same combinations regardless of circumstance. The cultural perception of poker shifted gradually from frontier roughness to competitive skill. As casinos in Nevada expanded after legalization in 1931, poker rooms became more formalized. Dealers were trained to enforce rules consistently. Tables were standardized in size and layout. Chips replaced informal currency. Surveillance mechanisms monitored play. The presence of a dealer introduced a structured authority at the table. While poker remained a contest among players, the dealer ensured order. The 52-card deck passed through trained hands before reaching participants. This procedural layer reinforced fairness and predictability. Televised poker tournaments later amplified this formalization. The World Series of Poker, established in 1970, provided a centralized stage. Participants competed under fixed rules. Broadcast coverage in later decades revealed hole cards to viewers through concealed cameras, creating a new spectator experience. The internal structure of the deck remained unchanged, but its visibility expanded dramatically. The mathematics underlying poker gained mainstream attention. Books and instructional materials analyzed probabilities, betting patterns, and psychological tactics. Players studied hand distributions rooted in the fixed 52-card composition. The deck's predictability enabled rigorous strategy development. Meanwhile, online poker platforms emerged in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Digital interfaces simulated the shuffle and deal through algorithms tested for randomness. Regulatory debates followed. Governments considered how to tax and oversee online gambling. The deck, whether physical or virtual, retained identical structure. Economic accessibility broadened participation. Online platforms allowed entry at minimal stakes. International tournaments offered multi-million-dollar prizes. This contrast created new social dynamics. Amateurs could compete alongside professionals. The democratization of access relied entirely on the universality of the 52-card system. At the same time, concerns about addiction and financial harm intensified. Public health discussions highlighted the psychological impact of gambling. Support organizations formed to address compulsive behavior. In these debates, the deck itself was rarely the focus. The conversation centered on human decision-making and regulation. Cultural representation of poker in film and literature evolved as well. Characters were portrayed as strategic thinkers rather than solely risk seekers. Bluffing became emblematic of calculated confidence. These narratives reinforced the perception of poker as both game of skill and test of composure. In domestic spaces, informal poker nights remained common. Families and friends gathered around tables in kitchens or basements. Snacks replaced saloon fare. Conversation accompanied betting. The structure of the deck provided continuity across settings. Internationally, poker integrated into established casino cultures in Europe and Asia. Monte Carlo hosted high-profile events. Macau incorporated poker into its broader gaming industry. Cultural attitudes toward gambling varied, yet the deck's structure bridged linguistic and regional differences. Educational institutions sometimes incorporated poker concepts into courses on game theory and behavioral economics. The fixed distribution of cards offered a clear model for strategic interaction. Students examined equilibrium strategies grounded in the mathematics of the 52-card deck. Technological innovation continued refining physical decks. Casinos adopted RFID-enabled cards to track play and prevent fraud. Yet even with embedded technology, the count and suits remained unchanged. Innovation focused on monitoring, not restructuring. Security concerns prompted development of shuffling machines capable of randomizing decks rapidly between hands. These devices reduced downtime and minimized manipulation. Again, the machine served the deck rather than replacing it. The rise of televised and online poker created celebrity players. Public recognition of individuals elevated the game's status. Sponsorship deals and media coverage expanded its reach. Through all of this, the deck's composition remained constant. Economic disparity persisted at high-stakes tables. Wealthy investors and professional gamblers competed for significant sums. At lower-stakes games, players risked modest amounts. The deck accommodated both scales seamlessly. Cultural symbolism continued to attach to certain cards. The ace of spades retained mystique. The royal flush remained the ultimate expression of rarity. These meanings were sustained by the mathematical structure of 52 cards. Global events occasionally influenced poker participation. Economic downturns altered discretionary spending. Regulatory shifts closed or reopened markets. Yet, whenever conditions stabilized, the game resumed without structural change. The resilience of the 52-card deck lies partly in its neutrality. It does not favor specific outcomes. It provides a balanced field upon which human behavior unfolds. Strategy, psychology, and chance intersect within its fixed parameters. If you imagine a table in a quiet room tonight, perhaps in a suburban home, perhaps in a bustling casino, the deck placed upon it is fundamentally the same as one used centuries ago in Europe. The images have been modernized, the paper improved, the context altered, yet the internal architecture remains. As poker moved confidently through the 20th century and into the 21st, the 52-card deck continued to travel in ways that would have surprised the artisans who first printed its ancestors. It no longer relied solely on caravans or riverboats. It crossed oceans in cargo containers, appeared in airport gift shops, and existed as lines of code inside distant servers. Globalization intensified after the Second World War. International travel increased. Commercial aviation reduced distances between continents. Soldiers stationed abroad carried card habits home. Business professionals traveled between financial centers. The deck moved with them, unobtrusive and adaptable. In Europe, long-established gambling traditions integrated poker gradually into casino offerings. Countries such as France, the United Kingdom, and Germany had regulated gaming houses long before poker's global surge. The 52-card deck fits seamlessly alongside games like blackjack and baccarat, which also relied on its structure. In Asia, gambling cultures predated European influence by centuries. Tile-based games, domino systems, and regionally specific card forms flourished independently. When American-style poker entered these markets, it did not replace local traditions but coexisted with them. The international structure of 4 suits and 13 ranks became part of a broader gaming landscape. Economic liberalization in parts of Asia during the late 20th century opened new venues. Macau expanded dramatically as a global gambling hub. While baccarat dominated its casino floors, poker tournaments gained presence. The deck, visually Western in origin, nonetheless found acceptance because its internal logic was straightforward. In Latin America, poker entered both informal home settings and organized casino circuits. Migration patterns between the Americas reinforced shared gaming culture. The 52-card deck, standardized in manufacturing and design, required no modification for linguistic translation. The symbols transcended language barriers. Technological change accelerated this integration. Online poker platforms allowed players from different countries to compete instantly. Digital interfaces displayed the familiar suits and ranks. Currency conversions occurred invisibly in the background. The deck remained visually constant even as players' locations varied. Regulatory frameworks evolved unevenly. Some governments embraced online gambling as taxable industry. Others restricted or banned it due to social concerns. Enforcement varied by jurisdiction. Through these policy shifts, the 52-card deck remained structurally untouched. Cultural narratives about poker diversified. In some societies, the game symbolized strategic intelligence. In others, it remained associated with risk-taking. Media representation influenced perception. Films and televised tournaments portrayed disciplined professionals calculating odds calmly. The mathematical foundation of the deck supported this portrayal. Educational institutions around the world incorporated poker into discussions of game theory. Economists examined equilibrium strategies based on fixed hand distributions. Psychologists studied bluffing as social interaction under uncertainty. Again, the deck's consistent structure made cross-cultural research possible. The manufacturing industry supporting physical cards expanded internationally. Companies in Europe, North America, and Asia produced decks adhering to global standards. Quality differences existed, but suit shapes and rank order remained identical. The portability of the deck continued to matter. In regions with limited digital infrastructure, physical cards required no electricity or internet. They could be used in rural communities as easily as in urban centers. The object's simplicity ensured accessibility. Cultural exchange occasionally influenced aesthetic variation. Some decks featured artwork reflecting local heritage, traditional clothing, regional symbols, or national landmarks. Yet for competitive poker, standardized imagery persisted to avoid distraction. As global tournaments grew in prize value, sponsorship and branding intensified. Professional players represented companies and online platforms. Television coverage translated commentary into multiple languages. The shared understanding of 52 cards enabled spectators worldwide to follow gameplay without confusion. Economic pressures influenced participation patterns. High-stakes tournaments attracted international elites. Lower-stakes games remained widespread among casual players. The deck accommodated both without structural change. Public health discussions about gambling addiction expanded globally. Support networks formed in multiple countries. Research examined behavioral patterns associated with online play. The deck itself was rarely contested. The focus remained on regulation and education. Meanwhile, informal play persisted across cultures. Families in different countries gathered around tables during holidays. Students in university dormitories organized small tournaments. Travelers carried decks in backpacks. The same 52 cards moved through these varied contexts. If you imagine a traveler in the early 21st century sitting in a cafe in Buenos Aires, another in a high-rise apartment in Tokyo, and another in a suburban home in Toronto, each might shuffle a deck identical in structure. The physical surroundings differ: architecture, language, cuisine, but the internal order of the deck remains constant. The persistence of this structure across continents underscores how durable design transcends cultural variation. The 4 suits require no translation. Their shapes are recognized visually. The hierarchy of ranks is intuitive after minimal exposure. Global digital platforms reinforce this uniformity. Software updates altered graphics and interface design, yet the underlying count of 52 cards did not shift. Players logging in from different time zones engaged with the same structure. Cultural symbolism attached to certain cards continued evolving. The Ace of Spades, for instance, retained associations in various subcultures, yet such meanings did not alter gameplay. The interplay between chance and skill in poker gained broader recognition internationally. Professional circuits developed ranking systems. Players from diverse backgrounds studied probability and psychology. The deck's stable configuration made training transferable across borders. As global communication accelerated, historical curiosity about the deck's origins resurfaced periodically. Articles revisited questions about why there are 52 cards. Symbolic interpretations with calendar parallels circulated online. Scholarly research clarified the gradual evolution from regional variations to standardized format. As the global reach of poker expanded and the 52-card deck became nearly universal, the game itself entered a new phase, one defined less by geography and more by information. In earlier centuries, poker knowledge traveled by word of mouth through saloons, private clubs, and printed rulebooks. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, information circulated instantly. This transformation altered how players approached the deck, but not the deck itself. In the 1970s and 1980s, competitive poker remained a specialized pursuit. Major tournaments existed, yet participation was limited primarily to professional gamblers and serious enthusiasts. Strategy was discussed in books and among small circles. The mathematics of hand probabilities, though available, was not widely applied by casual players. As televised tournaments gained momentum in the late 1990s and early 2000s, poker entered living rooms. The introduction of the whole card camera, which allowed viewers to see hidden cards during broadcasts, transformed spectatorship. For the first time, audiences could compare a player's decisions with actual hand strength. The 52-card structure made this comparison meaningful and consistent across episodes. The global audience learned quickly. Commentators explained odds. They described why a flush draw had a certain probability of completing. They outlined the ranking of hands: royal flush at the top, high card at the bottom. Because the deck structure was fixed, these explanations did not require adjustment across tournaments. Online poker platforms accelerated this educational process. Players could participate in thousands of hands from home. Software tracked statistics, recorded histories, and calculated probabilities in real time. Training materials multiplied. Forums analyzed specific hands in detail. The availability of data reshaped strategy. Players studied expected value, positional advantage, and optimal betting ranges. Mathematical models relied entirely on the unchanging distribution of 52 cards. The deck became a laboratory for applied probability. This era also blurred geographic boundaries. A player in Brazil could compete against one in Sweden or South Korea within seconds. Language differences mattered less because card symbols were universal. Hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades communicated visually. Economic accessibility widened the player base. Online platforms allowed low entry stakes. Satellite tournaments enabled modest buy-ins to lead to major events. The famous example of an amateur winning a world championship after qualifying online captured public imagination. It reinforced the idea that the deck structure offered opportunity to anyone willing to learn. Yet this democratization also intensified competition. As information spread, the average skill level increased. Casual intuition gave way to calculated decision-making. The deck's mathematical depth supported this evolution without alteration. Governments worldwide responded differently to online gambling's growth. Some embraced regulation and taxation. Others imposed restrictions. Legal debates focused on consumer protection and revenue rather than on structural aspects of the game. The 52-card deck remained neutral. In physical casinos, live poker continued alongside digital play. Tournament circuits expanded internationally. Professional players traveled between continents. Standardized decks ensured uniformity at every table. The physical qualities of cards also evolved subtly during this period. Manufacturers improved coatings to resist humidity in tropical climates. Casino decks were often replaced after limited use to maintain fairness. Security markings and RFID technology tracked play discreetly. Despite technological sophistication, home games retained their informal character. Friends gathered around dining tables with snacks and conversation. The deck's structure required no explanation. Even newcomers learned quickly through repetition. Cultural representation of poker diversified. Films portrayed analytical professionals rather than reckless gamblers. Documentaries examined psychological resilience at the table. Media narratives emphasized preparation and discipline. Academic interest continued expanding. Game theory research used poker as a model for imperfect information scenarios. Artificial intelligence programs were developed to play poker competitively. These algorithms relied on exhaustive analysis of 52-card combinations. When AI systems achieved success against human professionals, it underscored the deck's suitability for complex modeling. The deck's endurance across physical and digital realms reveals how design stability can support innovation around it. Software may change, platforms may evolve, but the core configuration persists. Symbolism attached to certain hands deepened culturally. A royal flush retained near mythical status. A pair of aces, often called pocket rockets, carried immediate significance. These nicknames arose organically from shared experience, grounded in the fixed ranking system. If you pause and consider how many human systems undergo constant revision, technological standards, communication protocols, financial instruments, the unchanged composition of the poker deck stands out. It suggests that once a structure balances probability, usability, and production efficiency, revision becomes unnecessary. The human element at the table, however, continues to shift. Players from different cultural backgrounds bring distinct attitudes toward risk. Some emphasize patience, others favor aggression. The deck accommodates all styles equally. As global tournaments awarded larger prizes, sponsorship deals and media presence grew. Professional players became public figures, yet the object they relied upon remained unchanged from centuries prior. As poker matured within global circuits and digital platforms, its cultural position shifted again. What had once been viewed primarily as gambling began to be described more frequently as a competitive discipline. The 52-card deck did not change in composition, yet its reputation evolved through association with analysis, endurance, and psychological control. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, professional poker players approached the game with structured training. Study groups formed. Strategy discussions became systematic. Probability charts were memorized. Software simulated millions of hands to test decisions. The deck's fixed architecture allowed for this level of scrutiny. Unlike games of pure chance, poker rewards interpretation of incomplete information. The 52-card structure creates predictable mathematical boundaries within which uncertainty operates. This balance between order and unpredictability distinguishes poker from simpler wagering games. Economic forces influenced this reframing. As televised tournaments attracted sponsorship and advertising, media outlets emphasized skill to legitimize coverage. Viewers learned terminology outs, equity, pot odds. The deck's consistency made these explanations transferable across events. In casinos, tournament organization became highly standardized. Blind structures were scheduled carefully. Seating arrangements rotated to maintain fairness. Decks were inspected regularly. The physical handling of cards followed precise procedures to prevent bias or manipulation. Clothing at high-profile tournaments reflected the game's professionalization. Players wore branded apparel. Some adopted neutral attire to conceal personal cues. The environment shifted from smoky saloons to climate-controlled halls with broadcast lighting, yet the cards themselves retained familiar design. Meanwhile, informal poker persisted outside formal settings. University students played low-stakes games in dormitories. Families continued holiday tournaments. The deck adapted seamlessly to casual laughter and to silent concentration alike. Globalization broadened representation within professional ranks. Players from Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa appeared at final tables. Language differences were overcome through shared card vocabulary. Hearts and spades required no translation. Artificial intelligence research advanced significantly during this period. Computer scientists developed programs capable of analyzing enormous decision trees based on 52 card distributions. When AI systems defeated elite human players in specific poker formats, observers noted that the deck's finite yet vast complexity provided ideal testing ground. This interaction between human intuition and algorithmic precision highlighted the deck's unique properties. Its fixed size allowed exhaustive modeling. Its probabilistic depth prevented trivial solutions. It balanced structure and uncertainty in ways suitable for both recreation and research. Economic volatility occasionally influenced poker's popularity. Financial downturns reduced discretionary spending. Regulatory changes affected online access. Yet participation rebounded when conditions stabilized. The deck's portability and low infrastructure requirements sustained resilience. Cultural narratives around poker diversified further. Memoirs by professional players described discipline rather than recklessness. Psychological resilience, maintaining composure after loss, became central theme. The concept of variance, rooted in probability, entered public conversation. The 52-card deck supported these narratives because it creates streaks and reversals naturally. Over short periods, outcomes can appear uneven. Over long periods, statistical balance emerges. This dynamic reinforces lessons about patience and risk management. In educational contexts, instructors sometimes use poker hands to illustrate broader decision-making principles. Students learn to distinguish between outcome and process. A correct decision may yield unfavorable result due to randomness, yet remain mathematically sound. The deck's structure provides clear examples. Despite professionalization, gambling risk remains inherent. Regulatory bodies continue monitoring casinos and online platforms. Responsible gaming initiatives emphasize limits. The deck itself remains a neutral instrument within these frameworks. Technological innovations such as mobile apps expanded access further. Players could join games from smartphones. The virtual deck displayed familiar suits and ranks in compact digital form. The tactile sensation of physical cards was replaced by touchscreen interaction, yet the underlying count persisted. Cultural artifacts referencing poker multiplied. Fashion incorporated suit symbols. Advertising campaigns invoked "playing your cards right" as metaphor. Such phrases depend on widespread recognition of the deck's hierarchy. If you imagine a modern tournament hall filled with hundreds of players under bright lights, the scene differs dramatically from medieval workshops or frontier saloons. Yet when the dealer shuffles, the same 52-card system governs every table. As poker continued to adapt to new environments, the conversation surrounding it grew more analytical. The 52-card deck, long accepted as fixed structure, became the foundation for increasingly sophisticated inquiry. Mathematicians, economists, psychologists, and computer scientists examined it not as novelty but as stable model of decision-making under uncertainty. Game theory, a field developed in the 20th century, found in poker a practical laboratory. Unlike chess, where all information is visible, poker operates under partial information. Each player sees only their own cards and shared community cards. The 52-card deck ensures that uncertainty remains measurable. The distribution of unseen cards follows strict combinatorial logic. Researchers explored equilibrium strategies, methods that cannot be exploited easily if executed consistently. These strategies rely on understanding frequencies of hands derived from 52 cards. The stability of the deck makes long-term modeling feasible. If the number of suits or ranks changed, equilibrium calculations would require revision. Because the deck remains unchanged, theory accumulates rather than resets. Psychological research also deepened. Bluffing became subject of formal study. Investigators analyzed facial expression, timing, betting patterns, and emotional regulation. The deck structure ensures that any given bluff occurs within defined statistical context. A weak hand may become powerful if opponents fold. This interplay between mathematics and perception rests entirely on the fixed card system. Artificial intelligence programs advanced further during this period. After initial successes in limited poker formats, more complex variants were modeled. Algorithms trained by playing millions of simulated hands against themselves, refining strategy iteratively. The finite but vast space of 52-card permutations allowed machines to approach optimal play. Observers sometimes asked whether such developments diminished the human element. Yet even with advanced modeling, live play still depends on interpretation of behavior. The deck provides structure. Humans supply variation. In economic analysis, poker became metaphor for markets. Investors weigh incomplete information, assess risk, and respond to competitors' behavior. The fixed deck mirrors constraints within which decision-makers operate. Probabilities are known. Outcomes remain uncertain. Educational institutions incorporated poker-based simulations into curricula. Students learn to separate variance from poor decision-making. The concept that a correct strategy can yield short-term loss became clearer when illustrated through card examples. Technological infrastructure supporting poker grew more refined. Online platforms implemented security measures to detect collusion or automated play. Data analysis monitored irregular patterns. The deck's structure allowed statistical benchmarks to be established reliably. Culturally, poker retained dual identity. In some households, it remained casual entertainment. In professional circuits, it demanded intense preparation. Media coverage sometimes emphasized discipline and resilience rather than spectacle. Economic cycles influence participation patterns. During prosperity, high-stakes events expanded. During downturns, online low-stakes play increased. The deck accommodated all scales. International competition reinforced standardization. Tournament rulebooks specified deck composition precisely. Even minor design variations were scrutinized to prevent advantage. Uniformity across continents ensured fairness. The symbolic meaning of the deck persisted quietly. The royal flush still represented peak rarity. The ace retained flexible status. Yet in analytical contexts, symbolism gave way to probability tables and solver outputs. If you pause and consider the act of shuffling, whether by hand or machine, you might notice how each shuffle rearranges the same elements into new order. That capacity for endless variation within fixed bounds underlies much of poker's appeal. After centuries of travel, adaptation, regulation, reinvention, and reinterpretation, the 52-card deck rests today in a curious position. It is at once historical artifact and contemporary tool. It belongs equally to medieval workshops, frontier riverboats, casino floors, family kitchens, and digital screens. Yet through all those transitions, its structure has not required revision. 4 suits remain, 13 ranks per suit remain, 52 cards form the complete set. When we look back across the long arc of its development, there is no single inventor who declared this number final. There was no council that designed it as cosmic model. Instead, the structure emerged gradually through trade routes, printing economies, gameplay refinement, and habit. Once established, it proved sufficient. The political climate surrounding the deck changed dramatically. Monarchies rose and fell, democracies formed, revolutions restructured nations. Yet kings and queens remained printed on card faces, detached from actual political authority and preserved as symbolic ranks. Social tensions shaped how the deck was received. Religious leaders warned against excess. Governments taxed production. Reformers criticized gambling culture. Still, the deck survived, not because it resisted regulation, but because it could function in moderation as well as in excess. Economic pressures influenced its spread. Cheap production made it accessible. Industrial manufacturing standardized it. Casinos institutionalized it. Online platforms digitized it. At each stage, the 52 card format fit existing needs without demanding change. Cultural values layered meaning upon it. Some saw symbolism in the calendar alignment of 52 weeks. Others saw reflections of social hierarchy in suits and court cards. Many saw only practical gaming tool. The deck accommodated all interpretations without contradiction. Mathematics illuminated its depth. Combinatorics revealed millions of possible hands. Probability theory used it as example of randomness within structure. Artificial intelligence mastered strategies grounded in its fixed composition. The same arrangement that once entertained merchants and soldiers now supports academic inquiry and computational modeling. Daily life continues to absorb it quietly. In homes, cards are shuffled across dining tables. In casinos, they are fanned beneath bright lights. On screens, they appear in digital form. The tactile sensation may differ, but the internal count remains steady. If you imagine holding a deck now, it feels ordinary. That ordinariness is itself the result of centuries of confirmation. The deck has proven balanced enough to endure without modification. You might wonder, in a quiet moment, whether such stability is accidental or inevitable. Could another number have served equally well? Possibly, but history selected this one through use rather than decree. Once embedded in habit, it became self-sustaining. The story of poker cards is therefore not dramatic in the way of wars or revolutions. It is steady. It demonstrates how design, shaped by practicality, can persist longer than political systems. It reveals how objects woven into daily life often escape notice, precisely because they function effectively. History cannot change, but our understanding of it can. When you next shuffle a deck, whether in a friendly game or alone, simply turning cards over one by one, you participate in a lineage extending back through centuries of ordinary evenings and measured risks. The number 52 does not announce itself. It does not demand reverence. It simply remains. And perhaps that is enough. In the end, what remains is not a verdict, but a question. The room grows quieter now. The table is cleared. The cards rest in a neat stack. The light softens. There is no need to calculate probabilities or recall historical details. The story has unfolded gently, as steady as the shuffle of cards through patient hands. You may picture the deck resting in its box, edges aligned, waiting for another time. The world beyond it continues to change, technology advancing, cultures shifting, new conversations forming. Yet that small structure endures quietly. Let your thoughts settle like cards returning to order after a game. The centuries of travel, printing presses, riverboats, casinos, and digital screens fade into stillness. There is nothing left to decide, nothing left to prove, only the soft awareness that something so simple could carry so much history without altering its shape. And as the evening grows calm, you may allow that steadiness to follow you into rest.